In this video, I'm going to talk about project scope management on construction projects. We'll talk about why scope management is such a critical part of construction project success. Then we'll look at all of the processes around project scope management from the PMBOK and how they're used in practice by construction project management professionals to ensure project success. I love this picture because I think it perfectly reflects how scope's dealt with on construction and infrastructure projects. Ultimately, scope comes down to contracts and money. And as we're going to see in this video, I'm going to talk about why scope is such a contentious issue, because it reflects how much work you have to do, how much money you've got to spend, and ultimately scope is really hard to accurately define on construction projects. So the first reason that scope management is always an issue on construction projects is because scope equals money. The construction industry operates on paper thin, razor thin margins, and it's a highly competitive, commoditized industry. Scope reflects how much work you have to do on a project. So the more work you have to do, the more money you have to spend. The less work you have to do, the less money you spend. And it creates this competitive tension between principals, so project developers and clients, and contractors. So what do principals want? They're paying for something to get done. So it's in their best interest to make sure the contractor does the most amount of work possible at the lowest cost. On the other hand, contractors get paid fixed lump sum amount for completing a project. It's in their interest to do the minimum amount of work possible and still get paid this fixed fee. So there's always creates this tension around principals wanting more work to be done and contractors wanting to do the minimum amount of work possible. The next reason that scope is always an issue on infrastructure projects is because scope is complex. Scope is challenging to define on construction projects. We've got the product scope, so the physical thing we're creating, what we're actually building, and that in itself is quite difficult to define because it'll be complicated. It'll be defined in complicated drawings, specifications, requirements. It might be multiple different trades. We might have civil and structural, mechanical, electrical, and the specific scope around all of these disciplines needs to be clearly defined and articulated in either project specifications or drawings. And these sorts of documents always end up having mistakes in them. And the other reason scope's hard to define is because as much as defining scope is about the end product we're building, it's also about defining the process through which we build it. For example, if we're building a road, there might be contaminated soil. Do we have to remove it or do we not? All of these issues defining the product and the project scope lead to ambiguities, which ultimately, because of the competitive tension I was talking about between principals and contractors, is always going to lead to disputes. So scope is always a contentious issue. Scope is hard to define. Importantly, scope is also hard to change. So unlike a software development project where we can go and alter the code, on construction projects, it's very hard to go back and change our decisions once something's been built. If we put a light pole foundation in a position, we can't really easily go pull it out of the ground and move it a meter across in the other direction. So after the initial project award, the feasibility study, we've developed the design, developed the technical solution. Once the construction project starts, it's very difficult to change scope. And on top of that, due to the procurement processes, also it's expensive to change scope. So during a typical procurement process, when a project developer's finding a contractor, they'll get competitive pricing. So they get prices from 3 contractors. They'll award the contractor the contract. They'll start the physical works. From that point forward, the principal can't get competitive pricing from other contractors because they've already got a contractor on site doing the works. And if they want to change the scope, they're going to have to go to this contractor who's not incentivized to price things competitively. So it also becomes expensive to change scope. So it's physically difficult to change scope due to the nature of construction works, but it's also expensive. So now we've established why scope management is important to infrastructure projects. Now I want to talk about these processes from the PMBOK 6th edition and how they map to project scope management on real-world construction project. The PMBOK processes on project scope management don't necessarily exactly align with typical construction project management processes. However, there's 3 areas where we see scope management most obviously. So these are design management, so the development of the project technical solution, procurement and contracts, so that's where between different parties, we're defining scope, signing contracts, and then one party is actually going out and delivering that scope. And then the third is project control. So these are the processes we followed to manage our schedules and budgets, and that aligns with the validate scope process. So now I'm going to go through, I'm going to look at each of the processes from the PMBOK and then align these with these construction project management functions. The first process from the PMBOK, plan scope management. So plan scope management, as we know, is all about how is scope going to be managed on a project. Well, in this case, in terms of a construction project, we'll have our business case and feasibility study. We'll have our project management plans, which serve the same function as the project management plans in the PMBOK. We'll have our design management plan, which determines how we're going to develop the project technical solution, specifically how we're going to engage stakeholders, how stakeholders are going to review and sign off on the drawings. That's really important part of collecting requirements. We'll have our contract management processes, our procurement processes. So how are we going to define scope in contracts and find and acquire external goods and services and suppliers to then deliver this work? So that's going to be all about transferring scope to other parties. And then finally, we've got our project controls plan. So our project controls plan will deal with our scheduling and our cost control and how we're going to manage these functions to effectively validate scope during project execution. The next process after we've planned our scope management is how do we collect requirements? So how do we correctly identify all of the requirements from the project? In that case, from a construction project, we'll have our business case and feasibility study. So this is the initial definition of the project scope and the decision whether or not to proceed with the project. We'll have our stakeholder engagement processes, where we engage with the different parties, the client that are impacted by the project. We have our design development process. So this is really how all the requirements from different stakeholders, the requirements of the client get integrated into the development of the project technical solution. So when I use the term the project technical solutions, it's the set of drawings and specifications that define exactly what we're going to build. So as part of developing this design, engaging with stakeholders and integrating, collecting their requirements will be a critical part of making sure that's actually reflected in the drawings and specifications that are showing us what to build. And then finally, we've got a safety and design process. So there's actually a legally mandated process around safety where while you're developing the design, you have to engage with specific stakeholders, particularly people who are going to be operating and maintaining what we're building, users of the asset, to make sure any safety considerations are also included and integrated into the design. The next process we've got is the define scope process. So the define scope is how do we clearly define and articulate scope. A construction project, because scope is generally technical, it's defined in engineering drawings, defined in project specifications. It's also defined in contracts. So we'll have project specification, for example, for a road project, it'll determine how wide the road's going to be, how many lanes, whether we have to provide street lighting, whether we're providing what sort of median barriers we're doing, are we doing landscaping? Generally, all that information is captured in a project specification. Then we'll have our design development process. So as you go through the design development process and the detailed design, we'll take a set of drawings and specifications, add detail to them. Stakeholders and the client will review the drawings, make comments on it. There'll be some sort of systems engineering process where we check and validate that what's included in the design covers the requirements in the project specifications. So that's a validate scope process. And then effectively we'll get to a set of drawings that we refer to as issue for construction. So these are a set of drawings and plans that define exactly what we're proposing to build and encompass all of this information. And then we'll go out and build it. So then the other way scope's going to be defined is through contracts. So when we talk about drawings and specifications defining scope, when we're transferring the responsibility to deliver scope through a contract, so whether it's a client engaging a general contractor or a general contractor engaging subcontractors, there's going to be a contract, but then there's also going to be scope of works documents. And to these documents that define the scope of a contractor, they'll also attach these drawings and specifications that define what they're going to be building. So scope is also going to be defined in the contract. Another PMBOK process that aligns incredibly well with how construction projects are managed is the work breakdown structure. Now, the work breakdown structure is my favorite construction project management tool. I think it has endless applications to all the different domains of project management, whether that's scheduling, estimating, quality. All these different construction project management functions benefit from using a work breakdown structure. So as we said, the work breakdown structure is the decomposition of the project scope into all the component pieces. So we'll use that when we're developing our schedules, our estimates, when we're mapping out our quality control activities, and effectively it's used everywhere in construction project management, particularly because, as I said before, the project scope is so complicated. So the only really feasible way we have to properly understand the scope is to break it down, and then it allows us to better control, understand, and manage it. Once we've defined scope, created our work breakdown structure, the next PMBOK process is to control scope. So control scope is about ensuring that the necessary work and only the necessary work is being completed. So in practice, how do we manage that on construction projects? Well, from a commercial point of view, from a contracts point of view, we administrate the construction contract. If we're being asked to do extra work, we submit a variation. Or if we're asking our subcontractors to do extra work, they'll submit variations to us. People are very careful about sticking in their lanes, only doing the scope they need to be doing. And ultimately, that's because the more work you do, if you're not getting extra time or money, then it's going to be eating into your profit margins on the project. We also use project controls to validate scope and control scope. We keep track of how much we're spending, how long things are taking, and if there's a cost blowout, a schedule blowout, that's probably a very good indication that we've done extra work or we've had some issue controlling scope, and that'll often be captured in earned value management metrics. So things like CPI or SPI can provide us additional insights and help us manage and control the project scope. The final PMBOK process is validate scope. So validate scope is ensuring the scope is accepted by the client and stakeholders. Now, broadly, we refer to this as completions management on a construction project, and it's a critical part of any project because as the contractor, if we're building something, at the end of the job, we want the client to accept what we've built so they pay us, so they release our security, and so that we can close out the project. So we do that through the quality management process. We'll do inspection and testing, create a punch list, track the closeout of all the defects, and this provides us evidence that we can show the client that we've actually checked what we've built, we're happy that it's correct. We'll do handover walkthroughs, so we'll actually do walkthroughs and inspections with the clients, give them an opportunity to identify any defects, comment on any issues, and broadly, this all fits under, as I was saying, completions management. So that's an entire process on construction projects because closing out a project, getting paid, moving on to the next project is such a critical function of construction project management.